Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Conversations for Our Time. This is podcast number 28. We really do hope that you enjoyed the last one. We started to go into the grand solar minimum, explaining what that is, and started to explain the various aspects that are connected to the grand solar minimum. And that was we're going to start another mini series, and this will be part one for the grand solar minimum. You don't know how many podcasts that we're going to do on it. We just want to give people enough information to break it down a little bit, so that they can do their own research on it, and so we can give them an idea what's coming. So we thought that the last podcast was very well explained, and we're happy about it. And we do hope people are understanding what is happening now when we start talking about the actual science of the weather systems and the sun cycles and everything else involved in it. And we'll break things down slowly because it is a massive subject, not to overwhelm anyone. Because as we explain this, explain the history of the Earth's climate, and particular parts of the grand solar minimum, we still don't know 100% of what's going to happen, and how quickly it's going to happen, or how long it will happen. It's just to prepare people, and it's just to empower people. So we hope this mini series will help people to do that. We'll recommend the certain books and podcast channels to go through, and just to build their own knowledge. It's fun learning it, but it is a serious subject as well. But we're here to help, and if you've got any questions, then please, please let us know. And we're happy to do any podcasts, any topics that you like, if we know enough about it. So we hope you enjoy it. And how are you doing, John?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks, George. Yeah, grand solar minimum. It conjures up a lot, and I hope last week's podcast kind of gave an outline to what it really is. And I wanted to kind of, because me and George were just talking before, that we don't really want to be, we don't want to be scaring people, because it's such a massive thing. I mean, imagine how people have been reacting, this hysteria, to man-driven global warming, right? People going out of their minds. I mean, there's even people that are counselling people in having these kind of psychological issues with global warming, that the world's going to burn up, we're going to destroy everything, etc., etc. And I think it's important to remember that everything is a cycle. The Earth goes through its cycles. Today is the equinox, right? Equal night. And the seasons are cycles, night and day are cycles. We spin around the sun. The planets go around the sun. We have our own internal cycles, our own psychological cycles. Everything goes through these patterns, and they're observable if you are objective enough to be able to see it. And civilizations go through cycles as well. We have rise and fall of civilizations. The most historically kind of researched is like the Chinese dynasties, thousands and thousands of years, Chinese dynasties have been rising and they've been falling. What is it that makes these civilizations rise and fall? Or any civilization, look at the Egyptians or the Romans, etc., etc. Why did they get to this epoch, and then it all suddenly just, within decades, the Roman Empire fell apart? And there isn't just one thing, but there is we believe, and there's a lot of research and evidence to back this up, that it's actually driven by solar cycles. It's the solar cycles that determine whether you can grow enough food to feed a mass civilization. And the Roman Empire was a conquering empire. It was a conquering civilization. It went throughout Asia and Europe and Africa to conquer. And if you can't feed an army, what happens? The army starves, right? So that's like context. But the other thing is that I mentioned this last time. Once we realize that these cycles are natural, we call it natural climate variability, rather than trying to deny or just ignore that these things are happening, or to blame, human beings for emitting too much CO2, the 0.02 of the 0.004%. Wouldn't it be better to devise strategies to be able to cope with this, to be able to adapt? Me and George were talking about creating this buffer. Most people try to save for a rainy day. Well, how about we prepare for a rainy day? How about we learn how to be self-sufficient? So if and when mass food production starts to diminish, and we have seen this around the world, perhaps not in the Western world yet, because we have a buffer, we might as well create communities so we can actually feed ourselves, and it's not just about surviving, it's thriving. So what this is teaching me, this whole experience, is that we need to collaborate with other people. Running away to the middle of the woods, for me now, isn't the best way to go. It's about creating a community so you can all support each other. So these cycles are amazing, and we can observe them on the sun. NASA's been observing them on the sun for, well, at least 50 years. And they've got very good records of sunspots, solar flares, coronal mass ejections, coronal hole streams, and what those things, or how those things, those phenomena affect us on the planet. So they affect us in many different ways. They affect our radio communications, satellite communications. They affect things like earthquakes, potentially volcanoes. They also affect the jet streams. The jet streams affect the weather patterns. The weather patterns affect our growing season. They also affect people's moods. They affect the cardiovascular functions in a human being. They can actually affect our emotions like the moon does. And it makes sense. 99.9% mass of the solar system, that's the sun. So why wouldn't it affect 99.9% of life on Earth in some way or another? So it's a fascinating subject, and it's huge. And a friend of ours has written a book on it called "The Climate Always Changes," and I think everyone would really benefit from knowing a little bit about it, because then they wouldn't be scared. The more you know about it, the more the freer you can become, because you can make the right choices, you can make wise choices. So what do you say, George?
Yeah, absolutely. It's all astrological, and it's about learning these cycles, and just learning about the sun, learning about, the moon, and learning about the sun earth relationship. And yeah, it's just they're good subjects to just study, and you'll empower yourself by studying these things, um, and you'll feel more in control, and you'll have a strong head, and you can do certain steps that help you prepare for your future. And yet, Juliana's book is fantastic. It's a great book, and we recommend reading it. I've read it twice. It's got so much information in it, and it could have been in an even bigger book. But there are so many links as well that we can, if we wanted to delve deeper. Um, and if people want to delve deeper in it, but that's enough to understand or have a good understanding of what the grand solar minima is, and the cycles that come with it. And there are other books. I'm not sure if I mentioned last time. You've got Dark Winter by John L. Casey. You've got some presentations that he's done on YouTube. He's got a book called Upheaval, why catastrophic earthquakes will soon strike the United States. Again, we don't really know 100% what's going to happen, but it's good to be aware of these things. If you're living in the USA, you might want to have a change, and move somewhere else. That's still you kind of empowering yourself. But it's good to know these things. It is our duty of care. And then you've got A Little Ice Age by Brian Fagan. You've got Cold Times, How to Prepare for a Mini Ice Age by Anita Bailey. And yeah, some people, some researchers are convinced that it would be a mini ice age, but we want to clarify that we don't really 100% know. So, you know, we just want to get you prepared. Um, and you've got the YouTube channels, Magnetic Reversal News, with Diamond. He's also got Oppenheimer Ranch Project. You've got Adapt 2030, and you've got Ice Age Farmer. There's plenty of information that you can get from there if you want to get your head stuck in. Me and John, we know enough about it, and we're just continuing to, prepare. I'm fasting and have enough food stored away, learn how to grow food in different ways, and just adapting. We want it to be a whole mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual process. And the spiritual side of it is very, very important. We want people to be spiritually strong. Only the people in the know are going to be able to perhaps thrive out of this situation. You know, we cannot not talk about this. So, yeah, I just wanted to say that. So, going into a little bit more of the effects of the grand solar minimum, and the basics of it. And I wanted to give the basics of what TSI is. It's total solar irradiance. Um, and I do want to say that I don't know if I said it last time. There are people regurgitating um, what's happening on the news, and they say things like, "Oh, it's global warming that's messed everything up." You know, you really have to understand the science behind there. The fact remains there is no science there, because they don't really ever break down the science, of why that this is happening, this so-called global warming. People are just believing in it and taking it on board, and it is a fear thing. And we're not here to fear you. We're here to empower you with the knowledge, and for you to decide. For you to decide, what is true. But you know, but they need to take into consideration of what is happening up there in the ionosphere and the other layers of the Earth's atmosphere, and why. Okay, because the TSI, it affects those layers and us down here as well, and how the jet stream is sort of behaving. So I do want to say as well, I'm no expert in science. I'm not saying that, and I do not pretend to be. I like to keep things very real. I just understand enough of the science of what is going on to our, what is happening to our Earth and why it's happening, and why global warming, um, or anthropogenic global warming, it is an outright lie. And people have this misconception with me that just because I have a completely different view of the world compared to society in general, that I must know better than the scientists that the government has bought and paid for. But because they are bought and paid for, you know, even the government itself is bought and paid for. But I'm not really going to go into the conspiratorial side of things. Um, I don't know more than them. I'm not saying that, but I do know when we are being lied to, and it's got to stop. And that's what I want. What I'm trying to do, for the future of humanity. Because if we're not prepared for what is coming, we don't want to put ourselves in a very vulnerable position. But
George, I just want to interject quickly, mate.
yeah,
Just to add to that, um, this look, people talk about, oh, only scientists know. You have to trust the science, right? To a degree, it's true. If you want to work out the TSI, yeah, you need a degree, you need a relative understanding of the science behind it. But school children can understand how these things work if you explain them simply enough. And this is the important thing. It's the same as what was happening with the most recent virus, right? If you understand that the human body can adapt and whatever you put into the body determines how strong the body is and how strong the immune system is, then you don't need a science degree in immunology. The same as you don't need a degree or a PhD in any of the space sciences or climatology. You just need to understand how cycles work. And this is the thing, laymen like ourselves, people like Diamond who have a lot of experience and qualifications in these fields, it's great because he can have discussions and arguments with people, and people like Willie Soon. These people are amazing, and the people you mentioned who've written these books, they're great because they offer a perspective and they are challenging the scientist or the scientific rhetoric coming from the mainstream. But you don't need to know all the science to understand. All you need to do is go outside every day for a month and see how the weather changes. And you'll start to understand the jet streams are not behaving the way they used to 20 years ago.
yeah, I totally agree with you. These things we must understand. We cannot blindly believe, you know, those supposedly trusted scientists, because that's what we've been doing our whole lives. And now look at the world. We were never in an economic crisis, never was. It was a greedy corporation crisis. And, I did try to warn people. Unfortunately, it did fall on deaf ears. No, but we've got to keep trying, because everything that's happening today in terms of that was all planned. The food prices, everything has been increasing, and you know there was no need to. All they're doing is crippling us and cornering us, and then we've got to pick out, the mainstream. Hang on a second, that doesn't make sense, or that doesn't make sense. You've got to bear in mind. I'm gonna say something right now that will blow all the anthropogenic global warming right out the window, and it squashes it. They are saying, that this is very, very dangerous times, and the CO2 is so high, it's dangerous for humanity. Well, if it's so dangerous, why are celebrities allowed to have a private jet? And there are thousands of them, probably tens of thousands of them, who've got their own private jets, right? And they're going shopping, and they, in one journey, they'll emit as much CO2 emissions than what someone would do in a year in their car. So if it's so dangerous, where is the so-called law for these kind of people? It's a different world, and then you've got Bill Gates, who's talking about the rising of sea levels. He bought a beachfront house in 2021 somewhere in America. I can't remember where now. Why? Why would you do that? And we have to understand that. I can't remember the exact figure when I checked it last time, but we have given in tax money like $20 trillion, I think worldwide, and it's going to go up to like $120 trillion in 2030. And they've said that they've needed to do this to create a new infrastructure. Well, you tell me where that $20 trillion have gone, John. You tell me, what have they done? Because all I see that they've done is fly around the world to have these emergency meetings that we pay for, the aeroplane, the planes, and the running of it. And what have they actually done? They've rustled some papers together and say we need to do this zero by whatever year. I mean, help me out, John. Doesn't that say? And I know you can add to this. I really, really know you can add to this. But doesn't that say enough to squash this scam?
Well, this is the thing, George. That $20 trillion is the debt. That's debt. It's the US debt, right? It's going towards the US national debt. And, this has been going on for a long time. Money being siphoned out of poor people's pockets in the form of tax towards very wealthy people, or people that are so wealthy that most people, you put a nation together, they won't ever be as rich, in their whole lifetimes. Like it's insane. Like probably 3 generations of American people would never be as rich as Bill Gates. That's how crazy it is, because their money, he's stolen their money. It might be indirect, but that money's been stolen from them. And the CO2 thing is, look, people in junior school and senior school learn that CO2 is plant food. What do plants produce? Plants produce oxygen. It's completely moronic that anyone who's gone to school can think that more CO2 is a problem. If we go below 180 parts per million, we all start dying, because how plants going to produce oxygen if there's not enough carbon? It's completely insane. So the thing is, all of this false information isn't logical. People aren't looking at this information in a logical way. They're looking at it based from a place of fear. That's how people get duped. Is if you create a narrative where, like we do when we go to school, right? We have an authority figure that teaches us a subject, right? We're the pupil, they're the teacher. Or you have the parent and child relationship. When you go into work, you have the same thing. You have the authoritarian relationship. The government is authority. We are, the people that follow the rules. So once you create that dynamic, you can say whatever you want. Politicians can lie. They can laugh in the House of Commons. Everyone sees this. Everyone knows this is insane, but people still go out and vote. And the reason they do is because most people have the Jesus mentality. They think that someone's going to come along and save them. They think the next politician that's going to get elected is going to be different. It's basic psychology, and it's because we have children living in adults' bodies. That's basically what's happening. And it's pretty, to me, I'm not mocking anyone, because I used to think this way, and it took a lot of courage and a lot of inner work to face up to the fact that I was being lied to, and I was lying to myself. And neither me or George are saying we're perfect. We're not saying that we're better than anyone else. We're quite fortunate that we've been able to step out of this. And from my perspective, I know this, we're talking about grand solar minimum, but I think it's important. From my perspective, I didn't have a lot invested in this capitalist world. I've never earned a lot of money. I've never really, bought into it. So it's easy for me to detach myself. All I've wanted to do most of my life is do the right thing. I've cared about people. I've cared about animals. I've wanted to try and make it a fairer world. And so, when it comes to a big thing like grand solar minimum, because it's so complex, most people get overwhelmed. They don't want to know about it, So but if we break it down into simple ways, it isn't that complex, because I'm not a very intelligent person, but we can understand it.
Yeah, I totally agree. I understand what you're saying. I understand what you're saying totally. I mean, this is the thing, and I have also been to my local MP. It was I can't remember exactly when, a couple of years ago. You know, we've got to figure out by now that these people aren't looking after us, right? And we've got to get outside of our heads that this is all conspiratorial. It isn't. People are homeless right now. And I'm glad you brought it up, John, because it is connected to everything, because in times of grand solar minimums, these things tighten our neck. You've got homeless out there still going on, right? And they're dying because they're starving, and they're dying because they're cold. Whose responsibility is it to roof these people? It is the royal family, and they haven't done anything about it. So we've got to look at these things and say, hang on a second, it really isn't right. We've got to stop saying that, yeah, the politicians, they're already out for themselves. We agree with that, but let's do something about it. What is the point of voting? We didn't vote for this. All this that's happening in the world was planned and created. I've gone to my local MP, and I bought various. I went to David Amos when he was alive, and I brought various things to his subject. And you know what he said to me? He knew what I was alluding to. He knew, and he said to me, George, if the powers that be are going to do something, they're going to do it. And I was talking to him about 5G. And what he said there, well, that just says it all. It doesn't matter who we vote for. It's going to be party A or party B and then bounce like a tennis match. It's ridiculous now. We've got to stop this. And we do mean it respectfully. You know, society has been guided and governed because they don't know how to govern themselves. And we mean that in the most gentlest respect. I couldn't even tie my own shoelace. Well, not quite that bad, but I'm 43 now, and 37 was when I was really starting to wake up, and that and say the things in the world aren't what it seems. And I couldn't really cook properly. I couldn't do anything. But since I switched the TV off, I grew. I grew up, and I stopped relying on having this nanny state, you know, and empowered myself. And by having a friendship with you, John, and the other member of the Quiet Sun team, I have grown so much, and I've learnt more in the last 7 years than I have done in my whole life. You know, we have to treat the earth as a school and learn ourselves, because they are not going to give us the truth. We learn from school that truth comes from authority, you know, and we learn that there is authority, not by these people, you know. I'm not accepting their authority. Authority is an illusion. And I talk about, you know, this fear factor that you mentioned, John. When somebody is in fear, they're never going to have a balanced brain. And I talk extensively about human consciousness and the brain, because the ancients were doing it and they understood it. But that knowledge got slightly hidden from us. And once we understand this, we don't have a number done on us. So they won't put us under this form of, it is mind control. There are many different methodologies that they put out there as mind control. We need to be aware of human consciousness, so we don't fall into the trap, and start empowering ourselves. I mean, I went to see another local MP. I forget her name. This was, so I saw David Amos. It would have been a few more years ago, but I saw this last MP. I think it was a couple of years ago, and I brought various subjects to the table. You know, the global warming, the global cooling, and vaccines, and I said, well, I've got all the scientists, I've got all the doctors, I've got the climatologists. I can provide you these people. Let's have a live debate, and they just weren't interested. BBC shut it down. ITV shut it down. They weren't interested in a live debate because we would crush them, and they know that we would crush them. They absolutely know that we would crush them. And their excuses was that they've already done two sides of this on TV before. But we didn't get to pick the doctors. We didn't get pick the scientists. We didn't get to pick the climatologists. You know, they did. So it was always going to be controlled. So I've done my homework in this stuff. They're not interested. They weren't interested in. They stopped replying to my emails. They are not interested in what we got to say. And people that are regurgitating, they must understand that the anthropogenic global warming. If you're going to believe in anthropogenic global warming, then you need to understand the parts per million. If you don't know that, then you don't know what the level and the threshold is for it to be dangerous. Yeah. So they are saying, well, they are saying that it's dangerously high. We are saying, by climatologists like Diamond, that CO2 is actually dangerously low. And I know you mentioned this before, but I'm just going to go into a little bit. It needs to be above 500 parts per million. And the last time I checked, it was about 450. And that low, if it gets any lower, it cannot support life. And they want to cut it. They want to cut this. So the parts per million is how many parts of carbon dioxide there is in 1 million parts of air. So 1 million parts of air, there are 500 particles of CO2. And as I say, I think it's probably lower now, but we need to understand this. I guarantee that there's barely anyone that knows who believes in the global warming that knows anything about the parts per million. You have to know this knowledge for it to make sense, and we bring these matters together. I'm sure you'd agree, John.
Yeah, definitely, George. And think like it's actually the CO2 parts per million is the lowest it's been in millions of years. Humanity's been here for a long time.
Absolutely.
Life has been here for a long time, and look, it basically comes down to like there is an indiscrepancy, right? So look, when I started learning permaculture, I started to learn about that actually CO2 can become stagnant. So when you're in a city, CO2 can be suppressed, right? Because CO2 is heavier than oxygen, so it drops down. So you can get a stagnation of CO2 in cities, but it's because there isn't any oxygen there, right? So it's me and George talked about these caveats, but the reason I'm mentioning this is because last week we talked about where they take their temperatures from, and they take them from cities. Most temperature records now, modern day temperature records, are taken from cities and airports. So it's cherry picking. They cherry pick these things to make it go in their favor. And look, we can pump CO2 into a greenhouse to help the plants grow healthier and quicker. What do plants do? They produce oxygen. So the more CO2 within reason, we can't, if we add like 8,000 parts per million, that's going to be an imbalance, right? But we can go, according to a lot of scientists, between 500 parts per million and 1,200 parts per million is a safe amount. In the last 20 years, you can check this out on NASA's website, there's been more greening of the planet, right? So, okay, if our CO2 is increasing, as they say, through, in the Industrial Revolution, the burning of fossil fuels that we think aren't actually fossil fuels, they're not finite, they're infinite, because we can see evidence that these oil wells are replacing, and actually oil and gas aren't generated in the way that we've been led to believe. That's another story completely. But as long as there is a balance between the carbon and the oxygen and the nitrogen and the other trace gases, life will continue to go on. There have been so many catastrophes over the history of the planet where CO2 has gone massively up and it's gone massively down, and oxygen levels have depleted and they've gone up again, etc., etc. And it's got really hot and it's got really cold, and humanity is still here. Yeah. So whether we're talking about global cooling or global warming, human beings have such a small effect on the climate, in inverted commas, the climate. What we can have an effect on is weather patterns to a degree. So if we desertify if we take away forest, then we are going to change a microclimate, right? So if you cut down, 1,000 hectares of rainforest, that part of the rainforest won't get rain, right? Because a rainforest makes rain. Yeah, that's pretty obvious. Um, you know, on the opposite side of things, there's parts of northern Africa that were desert that are starting to get greener because there's more rainfall there. So it's not a one size fits all. It's not every part of the planet is going to react in the same way to changing weather patterns. Everything has its own bioregional climate, and it changes according to things like the jet streams, which are driven by solar activity. And it's important to recognize that if you've got like 1,000 piece jigsaw. Me and my partner tried to do one of these the other day. It took us a long time. But if you have 1,000 piece jigsaw and you're missing 900 parts of it, do you think you're going to be able to know what the picture is? Probably not. You've got to assemble as many different parts of the picture as you possibly can before you can make an accurate assumption on what's going to happen. So if a climatologist goes, I know what's going to happen, well, have they taken into account total solar irradiance? Have they taken into account how the jet streams affect things? Have they taken into account the geology of things? Have they taken into account um, what happened 200,000 years ago? That's stored in the rocks. Have they taken into account the ice cores, etc., etc.? No, they probably haven't because they're reading from a book. So the reason me and George are doing all these things is to equip people with as much knowledge as possible so they can build their own objective view of what's actually happening on our planet.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll go into further details because I'm conscious of the time. We'll go into further details of everything that you mentioned there. And we need to remember that, you know, there's so much corruption with NASA and they do know what's going on. Okay, they do. Okay.
Never
All
a
of
straight answer, George. Never a straight
never a
answer.
straight answer. Absolutely, it's never a straight answer, and all of what we're talking about is very, very well documented. Okay, and we just want to bring all this evidence together. As I say, we're going to go into deeper of it in the next podcast and the podcast after because there's a lot of information, and I think I've brought up some valid points of the scam of that is the CO2 because we've got to stop and think what we're being told, and what is actually happening. It it doesn't make sense, and we don't we we can't just look at the last 140 years of history. You know, we can go so far back in history and unearth all this and look at the times that were hotter, um, where civilizations flourished. I can do that in the next podcast. You know, where it was warmer than it is today. You know, but we always pull through any bad, erratic weather. Ice ages. There's always been survivors, which is a beautiful story at the end of the day because you know it gives us hope that we can go through the hardest times and survive. And I think we're doing a pretty good job of preparing. We need to get the knowledge. We need to understand what's happening. We need to get the necessary hard copy books so we can pass it down to the next generations. We've looked at enough of the both sides of things and we've summed it up. And we don't just want to look at the last 140 years. We want to go way back in history And as I say, it's well documented. And then decide for yourself. Decide for yourself if this is hocus pocus. Ultimately, it's just about being self-sufficient and living like our ancestors did and past civilizations, because we don't want to fall. We want to get through it. And I think we'll bring in some seriously good tools here to help people prepare. So we'll go into it in further in the next podcast, John. So any last famous words from you today?
Yeah, thanks, George. Yeah, it's brilliant, and I just wanted to say that me and George, kind of are making this as natural and organic as possible. Our chats, we always have like a bit of a brief about what we're going to talk about. This time we didn't really get through what we wanted to talk about, but that's cool because actually we just allow it to naturally unravel. And it's really important to demonstrate how everything in the universe is interrelated. So it might seem like we're going off on a tangent, but there's always a connection there somewhere. And the essential point about our conversations for our time is that we we're talking from our experience of what's going on in our lives, how we're feeling, what our hopes are, what our dreams are. And our intentions really from our hearts is that we want to empower people and we want to help people to create the type of world that most of us want. So, I'm really stoked with the conversations we're having, and it's going to continue on into the future. So I hope everyone out there, whoever's listening to it, is enjoying it. And if you feel like this would help someone, please pass it on to them, share it. It isn't about statistics for us, but the more people we reach, the more people will hopefully become empowered and actually start living the life they want. So thanks, everybody. And yeah, we'll see you next week.
See you next week, folks.